A statement from a family of 12 from Luton saying they've travelled to live in Syria and feel safer than ever. Now, the Royal Opera House has bowed to pressure and toned down a controversial rape scene in its new production of William Tell after it prompted hostile and prolonged booing on opening night. Covent Garden bosses originally refused to alter the scene in which a female character is attacked by a group of army officers. Sky's Jonathan Samuels reports.
Singers across the country warm up for weekend operas like this staging of La Traviata. But not all productions strike the right note. Audiences and critics have taken aim at William Tell at the Royal Opera House. On opening night, they booed and heckled an explicit rape scene.
The audience, in a very way I've never seen before, actually felt that this moment was wrong, that it was gratuitous, and that it had very, very little to do with the opera.
The director has now toned it down, to the disappointment of one of the stars.
I think that the scene should stay that it was, with scream, with slightly nudity.
We're told the new sanitised version of the opera here is selling well, but it has opened up the whole debate about pushing artistic boundaries. Should performers bow down to pressure from audiences, or should they stand up for their creative rights? We asked opera-goers what they think.
It's their interpretation and that's what we go to see. And if I don't like it, that's my choice.
I think when there's such a reaction, something has to be changed.
It's good to see different interpretations of it and be as true as you can to the score and the story. So I admire them for being different.
It's not the first time artists have been criticised for going too far. Last year, a gory scene in Titus Andronicus at Shakespeare's Globe caused 100 people to faint or walk out. The director's view, it was rather wonderful audiences were connecting with the play. Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball music video was slammed for being sex-crazed and explicit, despite being watched 750 million times on YouTube. And a graphic rape scene in Game of Thrones led to a US senator calling for the show to be boycotted. But its creator argued it would be dishonest to leave sexual violence out of war.
I do not think that the people's right, the audience's right not to be offended, trumps the director's right to render the opera as he sees it. You know, this is an opera about oppression and war, and it has got a lot of rape in the story.
William Tell's director initially said it was important for art to highlight the real brutality of rape, but as all performers know, offend the audience, and ultimately it could be curtains. Jonathan Samuels, Sky News, Covent Garden.
Well, we can speak now to the Telegraph journalist Rebecca Reid. She's in our central London studio this evening. Good evening to you. Well, I guess it's a fine line, isn't it, between art and sensationalism for the sake of it?
It absolutely is, and I think the important thing always is the intention. And I'm given the impression that the intention with William Tell was to portray the sort of very real brutalities of rape and sex crimes within war. And I think that the reaction has been mostly about the offence of the audience. But to me, I think it's more offensive to portray it in a sanitised way than in a realistic way.
Don't we know, though, that rape and sexual violence is sadly an all too real part of war? Why do we need to see it on our stages and on our TV screens?
I think it's so easy from our sort of positions of comfort, particularly living in the West and not being exposed to it every day, to forget how real it is, both in war and in domestic situations. So I think however much it's uncomfortable and how much we don't want to be reminded, that's why we should be reminded.
But isn't there a duty for whoever portrays this in this opera, for example, or other examples that were in Jonathan's report, for those who produce these to explain that it's going to be graphic, it's going to be violent, to warn their audience beforehand? We know now that the Royal Opera House have written to those who are coming to see it, and also people are going to see it in cinemas, I understand, also this weekend. So they've been given that warning. Shouldn't they have been given that in the first place?
I'm not sure. I think if you're seeing a story, an opera that is based around war, it's to be expected that there will be brutality, and somehow we're more offended by sexual violence than we are by any other kind of violence, which is symptomatic of a really negative attitude. And in fact, if you're comfortable with seeing something that you know will be violent from the outset, why is sexual violence any different?
But isn't the counter-argument to that is that it offends us, it upsets us, as indeed it should?
And it is upsetting, but that's the point. And I think all art is supposed to inspire and connect with the audience, and that's not always going to be a pleasant experience. It can be upsetting or traumatic, and I think that's part of what they were setting out to do.
I want to pick up on another example. I don't know if you've seen this, Game of Thrones. I'm an avid fan, as are millions around the world, and they've had some very brutal scenes in the past series, 3 graphic rape scenes, and in the last episode, one woman forced to walk naked through the streets for a very prolonged shot. Anyone who saw that was very uncomfortable viewing. It was a walk of shame, as it were. Did that really do anything to raise the issues around rape, or again, was that just gratuitous?
I think it opens the dialogue, and I think that what Game of Thrones has done, particularly with the most recent rape, is they've shown the recovery afterwards and the character development. And I think the only time when it's problematic to include rape or sexual violence in drama is when you don't show the after effects and the way that it changes a person's life. And Downton Abbey had terrible complaints after their rape scene, but they actually eventually opened up a really important dialogue about sexual violence and rape. So as long as the recovery is part of the narrative, I think it's a really valuable way to open the discussion.
So you think that authors and producers of these kind of works of art have a responsibility to make sure that they carry it through once it's been portrayed in whatever medium it has, that they offer maybe even a service at the end of the production, say if you've been affected by this, for example, as we see on our TV screens often, that they then put you in touch or give you awareness of a charity, that kind of thing, that could help people if they're upset?
Absolutely, because I think people forget how often people connect with characters in shows and in fiction, and you have the platform with fiction to encourage people who've been victims to seek help and to speak out, but that has to be done with responsibility rather than just for sort of better ratings or more publicity. OK,
Rebecca Reid, fascinating to talk to you. Thanks very much for your thoughts this evening. Now, as California suffers one of its worst droughts in living memory,